For our very first presentation of the day, I would like to introduce my new friend, Sven Huynink. All right. He is going to be, All right, he's going to be talking about one of my absolute favorite topics in all of language creation, which is noun cases. I'm really looking forward to this. So everybody, Sven Huynink.
I think I have the feeling I'm coming out of the closet now after 7 years of lonely language making. So this is the first time I've ever talked to anyone about my language for more than 5 minutes, because then they run away. Well, I just start with my presentation. My language is Elenia. Elenia is spoken in Eleanor, and Eleanor is right here, off the coast of France. This is an old version. You will see a newer version coming up really soon. That language has the main problem, the main challenge for me is based on 3 pillars. It's a Celtic language. It's part of the Celtic French, Ireland, Scotland, Welsh, Breton. So it's Indo-European. It's Salvador. It's beautiful in talking speak, and it's semantically consistent, or at least I tried it to be. But there's a very big challenge to have it both Celtic and European and semantically consistent. And my challenge is to reconcile the first and last to my taste. Everyone has their own taste, of course. This is my taste. So when I started my language, I stumbled over things like Jack calls Bob or kicks Bob, and then Bob is accusative, and Jack gives Bob a call or a kick, and then Bob isn't accusative anymore, while his nose is bleeding the same way.
I need to switch to this one. We're going to turn off from here.
Okay.
Very sorry.
Hello? Hello, hello. Yeah, listen.
Did you just...
Hello, hello, hello. Okay.
Yeah, nice.
So, I was worried about inconsistent object syntactics, but I was always also worried about inconsistent things like Jack sees Bob and Jack looks at Bob. Well, his eyes are doing the same, he's using his eyes, but there are different verbs, there are different cases. And I thought, well, he's doing the same, or is he? Well, then I stumbled, of course, to absolute ergative languages. They look nice, but they have the same problem, only the other way around. Not the highest is always consistent, but the lowest is always consistent. So that wasn't the solution. Then I found that in Urdu, you have ram hook up. But if he does it purposefully, then it's ergative. Well, I thought, well, that's nice. Then you can have a difference on purpose and not on purpose. So I started to remember that. I wanted to have intentionality in my language. And I also discovered quirky subjects in Icelandic. I need money is not, the I is not nominative, but is accusative, because it's something that happens to you. And I like the food is also something that happens to you, but you're more of an actor in that case, and then it's dative. Well, I like that too. And then I found the right way. I must admit it wasn't through David that I found active, but this is the best description I found on the net. The famous ergativity, and I liked best the semantically based split ergativity. While the woman is sleeping or sleeping on purpose, again that intentionality thing, and you can also be dancing accidentally. It's hard, but if you don't try it, it's not. You can still do it, it's accidental. But of course, I was very worried that I would lose the Celtic link. that my language would be weird. Well, in the meantime, I've learned to know a lot of more weird languages, but for me, as a beginning conlanger, it was rather weird, and I didn't want to lose the Celtic link. I wanted still to be a Celtic language. And this was my fear. And I didn't want that. I wanted it to remain a Celtic language. But then I discovered that Middle Welsh was an active language. All active languages are in far off corners of the globe, except Middle Welsh, which has some activity or had some activity in its language, and Middle Welsh is even a Celtic language. So if they can do it, I can do it. And you can see that I fought for my beer. It wasn't me that came up with the examples, of course. But then you have Ohonafi. Chris may correct me on that. He knows more about Welsh than I do. But the O says that it's an intentional action, while Kun Deodef Priest Christ isn't intentional, he is experiencing the suffering. So that doesn't have an O. Well, if they can do it, I can do it. And I even read that Proto-Indo-European it was an active language itself. So I thought I could get away with that. So that worry was gone. And then I started a quest for verb classes. I wanted to make to learn about some classification of verbs that I could use that had meaning, that would make my syntactics semantically consistent. So I came across Mr. Fillmore in 1970. He wrote about semantic frames based on lexical semantics, which looked nice, but there were 230 of them, which was not very handy for my language. And Ms. Levin had 193 verb classes. The amounts were quite large. I didn't know what to do with it, and they also had multiple class membership. So a verb wasn't only in one class, but could be in another class too. Well, that didn't suit my wishes, so I threw that up. And I, of course, came across a lot of other verb classifications, the famous by Mr. Vendler. States without end, activities without end, accomplishments which have an end, and achievements which have an end, and they're 4 corners of actions art classification. But I thought, well, they are inherent in the verb, so I couldn't do anything with that. I also saw Kenny's 3 classes. He discerned states and events were split from activities and performances, which came from Aristotle, who said that you cannot be in the process of being cured and be cured at the same time. You're either in the process or you're cured. But you can be in the process of having a nice life and having a nice life on this moment. So this basic dichotomy between kinesis and energy, I thought about it, but I couldn't do much with it. By the way, Mr. Verkuil, which is a professor who was a professor in Groningen himself, made a threefold grouping again by having states of no change, which are simply states of change, which are eventless activities, and change of state, which is an immediate change of a situation. You sneeze or you don't sneeze. And I thought, well, I can use that. But imperfect verbs or imperfective verbs or perfective verbs, I thought I could use that. And I did. Very early on, some 7 years ago, I came across Rickman. I don't know whether you know him, but he tried to have a machine interlingua which could easily translate from to whatever language through an intermediate language, and he tried to make that as logical as possible. Well, that suited me, so I spent some years wrestling with his setup, which had a static and a dynamic version of each verb. So you have I know, which is static, and I begin to know, I learn, which is dynamic. So you could make, from each static verb, you could make a dynamic verb. And I solved that in my language to have a prefix S from the Proto-Indo-European to be, and I swapped that with to become. So in my language, to become, the Proto-Indo-European to become root has become to be, and this was a tricky way to have a simple S making it dynamic. It sent me also on a quest to reflective verbs, and I like that too. The middle voice is not just a passive, it doesn't happen to you while you want it or not, but the passive voice is that you make something happen to you actively. So you're not the reactor, but you are the initiator of an action done to you. I have my haircut is a middle expression. You don't do anything, but you initiate an action done by others. I wanted that too, so I wrote that down. And then I came across Mr. Dixon, who had a very nice large book. And he said me that there are semantic types in English. He didn't say that this was an exhaustive list, which I felt sorry for. But he said, well, there are a lot of verbs who have more than two arguments. Because I wrestled with to give, where subjects have different status. A gives B to C. Well, then you are the initiator and actor of an action to give. C is given B by A, then you are the receiver, you're not acting, but you are participating. And B is given by A to C, then B is just a humble undergoer of the action. And I wanted to make that semantically consistent too, and I then discovered that the normal way we do that, B is the accusative and C is the beneficiary, and C is then in dative because we have a dative solution. I thought there's also, I discovered there's also another solution to that, which had a wonderful name, deprecative, and I didn't know really what the solution would be, but I wanted that name. So I took that down too. And then there's a simple word order where you can see by the word order which argument means what. But then I had some detransitive troubles. I wanted to have consistency in the theme, which is the book that is given, and the recipient, which is the beneficiary who gets the book or a cake or whatever. But a question for you. Status of indirect object is something I certainly didn't think about in many of my languages, and I believe they are less realistic for it. The citation from whom? Not talking. Something on the same level. Someone on the same level.
Someone.
David.
I might have guessed.
So when I read that, I thought, well, my language should improve on David. And I discovered that Martin Hasselmath had 4 basic positions for object argument marking. The theme, so the book that is given, can that have the same case as the object, or the recipient can have the same case as the object. And then there, of course, is the difference whether it is a nominative language or an absolute language. So there were 4 basic positions. But as I was going for an active language, neither of these suited me, so I wondered whether it would be active detransitivity. And I read Anna Sibierska about it, and she researched it quite thoroughly, and she found none. There is no active detransitivity. So I thought maybe I should do it in my language. But she said, well, there's a recurring alignment principle that is animacy hierarchy. So when the recipient is more animate than the book, which most recipients are, then the recipient gets accusative and the book doesn't get it. But if a prisoner is taken, is given to a city, then the prisoner might be the more animate person. So then the theme is designed as accusative. So animacy was the way to go. But then there's of course the question where it's animate and where it's not animate. So I didn't know that for sure, and I wrestled with that too. But anyway, I wanted animacy in my language. And then I, of course, discovered, which I should have discovered early on, but it was quite late that I discovered it, an accusative languages and an ergative verbs. So an accusative verbs are verbs where you are only the experiencer. You fall, you die, you sleep. When you commit suicide, then of course you are not an accusative, then you are actively participating, but default is that you are just experiencing it. And ergative verbs are verbs that you cannot do unintentionally. You cannot walk unintentionally. Maybe you cannot even dance unintentionally. And then there are ergative verbs which are spontaneous actions, but they are not intentional. So to burst, to blossom. So I wanted something with that. So I wrote that down too. But then again, I wondered whether I would not drift away too much. So the same problem was happening to me again. But then I read in a book from Baker, a very interesting book, The Atoms of Language, which goes about universals. That is often that even closely related languages can differ much by just one universal. Slavic languages, they're quite strange to us because they have different verbs for different aspects. The perfective verbs are different verbs, often prefixed verbs of imperfect verbs. French and Spanish and Italian differ on the non-subject parameter. So you can say it rains in English, or ça pluie in French. But you can say it in one word without the subject in Spanish and Italian. And of course you have the Celtic word order. Celtic has a VSO order, so the verb is in front, which makes it a rather different looking language. So if one universal, you can add one universal without being non-European language. So I thought, well, the only thing my language differs from normal languages is that they have relatively much stress on consciousness, on affectedness, on intentionality. So I thought I could get away with that, I hope. So I had some thoughts that I wanted to have for my for language. Well, the applicativity was nice, but it didn't help me much, apart from having a nice name, so that was hard. And imperfect verbs and perfective imperfective verbs and perfective verbs I wanted to use, and I did use. That is not the topic of this subject, so I leave them out too. Dus I had those four, and all I needed now was a nice verb classification, which eluded me for 6 years. And then I came across Mr. Tsunoda. Tsunoda had a verb type hierarchy predicting distribution of intransitive and transitive coupled in languages. He had 6 main classes. The effective action, which might have a result or might not have a definite result. To kill, to break, then you really have an effective action, whether you intend it or not. And when you just hit or shoot, you don't know whether it's effective, but at least an action. Then you have somewhat less actional is perception. See and look. Here they are again. Even more less active is pursuit, knowledge, feeling, and relation. I thought, well, that might be quite nice. And then I had, well, it was I came across Malchikov's article about Tsunoda, so it was right on the same page. And Malchikov said, well, it's better if you have a two-sided thing, effective action, and then contact, pursuit, emotion, perception, emotion, and sensation. And after that, it's quite intransitive. Well, that looked very nice, and then Malchikov thought some more. And he came with this very nice integrated view. Here we again have effective action, contact, pursuit, motion, and then two intransitives. Effective agent, which is eat, perception, see, cognition is look, emotion, feel, love, hate, sensation, be cold, feel cold. And then you have the middle verbs. You have reflective verbs, you have interaction verbs, and spontaneous, the ergative, burst and blossom type. So I thought this finally was a very verb classification I could use. I tried it and it fit. And that was the final step towards my present, it might be otherwise tomorrow, but present verb system, where I have 3 main conjugations, the first, second, and the third. The first is just intentional verbs. When you have with intentional meaning, you want to hit somebody, then it's conjugated in the first conjugation. And when you have the passive of that, then you don't do anything, but you let things be done to you intentionally. So that's the middle. So here you have, with the first conjugation, you have the actor. It's intentional, and you are affected. Affected means that you know that something happens to you, which can only mean to have meaning to animate persons or definite animals, as my present line goes. Then you have the middles, the passive of that, which is not, you're not the actor. When you have your haircut, you're not cutting yourself. You should not. But it's intentional, and you are affected. The second is an accusative verb type, which is this one. You sleep, you fall, you die, maybe even at the same moment. You're not the actor. It's not intentional, but you're experiencing things. Then you have this one. Then you have this one, which is when a stone falls. It's not acting by its own. A lot of stones are not intentionally falling, and it's not experiencing anything as far as we know. So that's the passive part. And then there's this last conjugation, which is the active on the non-intentional verbs, which you are acting, you're pushing someone by accident, you're acting, but it's not intentional, and either you are, as a person, are experiencing that, or as a stone is hitting your head, it's unintentional. It's an action that is unintentional. So these are my five my five positions of the actor. I came out that it didn't was realized by arguments. I have an argument structure behind that, but it's far too complicated to tell that too. But the basics are made by verbs. But the problem there, of course, is that you can hit someone intentionally, then you do it by this conjugation. You can hit someone with it unintentionally, accidentally, then you do it by this. Or you can be hit, and you do it by this. So every verb is in multiple clauses. So that wasn't my meaning, but I still wondered whether I could get away with that and still be named in the European. And then I remembered Icelandic. Icelandic has, you have drunk of Sven, and that again is not my line, so it's very accidental that it's Sven here. Then it's accidental with it's an adjective because you are not actively doing anything. And did you like the food? Again, is dative. Mrs. Butt, Miriam Butt, has made a very nice list, which isn't very clear cut. A theme can be represented by a nominative, by an adjective, by a dative, or by a genitive. I didn't like that. I want to be more precise, but this is the way Icelandic does it. And what happens in that language by quirky subjects, so that's subjects other than a nominative for the subject. In my language, it happens by verb constructions. So I thought I could get away with that, and here are some examples in my language. If then means to push, then I push him is then I, and I push him, that's RCA, and I push him is then I say, etc. I won't bother you with my language. But all I wanted was semantic logicality, and I thought I had it. I made it finally, so that was very nice. And so George's round is in its place. This is what I wanted to. This was the only thing that didn't work out very well. So this is what I wanted to say, and as I said before, it's the first time I talk about my language. I have the most beautiful disclaimer I found on the net, and this is by Mr. Talking. Be kindly of my presentation. Thank you.
Well, okay, you just read a little part of your language, and would you have some longer sentences to read? Because I was interested in the pronunciation of the language that you made.
I have been very busy for the last 8 years with construction, so I have very few lines.
Yes.
But at least I've got the longest text I've ever produced was the relay text, and I had to invent a lot of words for that. But I now know that there's a place on the Conlang site where I can put stuff on of my language, and so I will do that shortly. Okay. Okay.
Can we go back one slide real quick?
Sorry?
Can we go back one slide real quick?
I think we can. Yes, we can.
Okay, so sorry, I guess I missed the I missed the, sorry, the abbreviations. So you've,
What is Denne means to push.
right,
I push him intentionally. Is an RCA. IUCA. This Denne, I is him. And Denne has an active first conjugation ending.
Right.
And I push him inadvertently is with an IS, which is wrong. Yeah, because it should be like it's AM.
oh, AM.
EI, but EM.
EM. Okay.
Yeah. It was late Friday night.
That's all right, it always happens.
So the ending differs, and sometimes the root differs between the first, second, and third conjugation.
Okay.
And every verb has one base conjugation. So push is basically first conjugation, and it has to be then changed over into second or third conjugation. And then sometimes you get some infix there.
All right. Very, very cool. All right. Any more questions in the room? All right. Thank you very much.